here is a crazy paradox for you. You can be the absolute king of the lake at 6 in the morning, pulling in fish on every single cast, and by 10:15, you look like you have never held a fishing rod in your entire life. The lake turns to glass, the sun gets hot, and the bite just completely vanishes. Your grandpa probably told you that the fish are just taking a midday nap and you should go eat lunch. Well, I am here to tell you that grandpa was dead wrong. The fish did not go to sleep, and they certainly did not leave the lake. They are still sitting right there, laughing at your lures. Today, we are going to expose the real scientific reasons why the spring bite completely shuts down on a calm morning. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will realize that you have been fishing blind for years. So I have to ask before we start, do you stubbornly keep throwing the exact same morning lure until noon, hoping for a miracle? Let me know in the comments. Before we get into the exact reasons why everything falls apart, we need to talk about why this happens to almost every single angler out there. Spring fishing is built heavily on morning momentum. You wake up early, you tie on your confidence bait, and because the fish are incredibly aggressive at dawn, that bait works perfectly. This creates a terrible habit. We get brainwashed by our own early morning success. We convince ourselves that we found the ultimate secret pattern for the day. So when the sun gets high and the wind completely dies out, we refuse to adapt. We keep beating the shallow waters with loud, fast-moving lures because that is what worked 3 hours ago. Entire generations of fishermen have accepted this dead zone as an unavoidable fact of nature. They pack up the boat, head back to the ramp, and tell everyone that the bite just turned off. But the reality is the lake ecosystem simply shifted into its second phase of the day, and you missed the memo. Let us talk about the exact moment the magic dies. You know the feeling perfectly. You got out on the water before the sun even thought about coming up. The mist is still dancing on the surface and the lake is dead calm. During those first few hours, you are a fishing god. Every cast gets slammed. The fish are aggressive, busting the surface, practically jumping right into your boat. You are thinking to yourself that this is going to be the absolute best day of your entire life. And then the clock strikes 10 in the morning. The sun climbs a little higher above the tree line. The wind is completely non-existent. The surface of the water looks like a giant, flawless mirror. And just like somebody flipped a massive switch underwater, the bite completely shuts down. You cast and cast, but nothing happens. It feels like every single fish in the lake just packed their bags and left town. You start second-guessing your bait, your retrieve, and maybe even your own sanity. Your buddies tell you the morning feed is over and it is time to head home. But let me tell you right now, they are dead wrong. The fish are still there. They are still hungry. You are just completely ignoring what the calm water and the high sun are doing to the environment beneath the surface. You are still fishing like it is 6 in the morning, and that is your absolute biggest mistake. Let us break down the first massive change that happens right around that 10:00 clock mark, and that is the specific angle of the sun. When you are out there at dawn, the light is hitting the water at a very low horizontal angle. Most of that light bounces right off the surface, leaving the underwater world in this perfect dim twilight. Fish are apex predators, and they use this low light to hunt because they have a massive visual advantage over smaller bait. But when that sun gets higher, the rays start penetrating straight down, deep into the water column. Suddenly, that shallow flat that was a safe hunting ground turns into a massive, brightly lit stage. The fish suddenly feel entirely exposed. In a calm spring lake, the water is usually pretty clear because the summer algae has not fully bloomed yet. This means the sunlight cuts deep. The predators know that if they stay in the bright shallows, they become incredibly easy targets for birds of prey or bigger fish. So what do? They do not stop eating entirely, they just pull back. They move away from the completely exposed areas and look for any kind of cover or shade they can find. If you are still throwing your favorite topwater lure over that bare, sunlit flat, you are wasting your time. You are casting into a ghost town. The fish have adjusted to the light, but you have not adjusted your strategy at all. Now we absolutely need to talk about the very bottom of the food chain, because if you do not understand the plankton, you will never understand why the big fish disappear. Plankton are microscopic organisms that drive the entire ecosystem of the lake. In the early morning, under low-light conditions, these tiny creatures migrate right up toward the surface of the water. Naturally, the small minnows and baitfish follow them up to feed. And of course, the big predators follow the baitfish. It is a perfect, shallow water buffet. But once that morning sun gets bright and intense around 10 in the morning, the ultraviolet light becomes way too harsh for those microscopic organisms. They do not have sunglasses. To protect themselves, the plankton slowly sink down into deeper, cooler, darker water. As soon as the plankton drop out of the upper water column, the baitfish dive right down with them. The grand buffet has officially moved to a completely different floor. When you are standing on the bank or sitting in your boat wondering why the surface went completely dead, this is the hidden reason. The primary food source literally sank beneath your feet. The big bass or walleye are not going to stay in the shallows if there is absolutely nothing left to eat there. They follow the bait. If you want to keep catching fish after the sun gets high, you have to follow the food chain down into the depths. Let us look at how baitfish behavior completely transforms when that morning stillness sets in. Early on, you probably saw massive schools of bait flicking on the surface, making nervous little ripples. That gave you a very clear target. You knew exactly where the predators were staging, but by 10 in the morning on a flat, calm spring day, those nervous ripples vanish entirely. The surface goes incredibly slick. The baitfish realize that without the morning shadows or a nice wind ripple to hide them, swimming near the surface is a guaranteed death sentence. Any bird flying overhead can spot them from a mile away, so they tighten up their schools and hold extremely close to structural breaks like deep weed lines, rock piles, or steep drop-offs. They become incredibly cautious. Your granddad probably told you that fish just take a nap in the middle of the day. That is old-school nonsense. Fish do not sleep like we do, and they certainly do not turn down an easy meal if it is presented perfectly. They are just grouped up tighter and hiding much better. Because the baitfish are no longer scattered all over the shallow flats, the predators do not need to roam around constantly hunting them. The predators set up shop right next to these tight schools of bait, waiting for one to make a stupid mistake. If your lure is not dropping right into these specific tight strike zones, you are not going to get a sniff. Another massive factor that absolutely nobody talks about is the thermal shift in the water column. Spring weather is incredibly tricky and unpredictable. The nights are still freezing cold, but by mid-morning the blazing sun can actually feel pretty warm on your shoulders. Because the wind is dead calm, the water does not mix at all. What happens is that the top few inches of the lake heat up very quickly, while the water just a foot or two below remains ice cold. This creates a very sharp, very sudden temperature barrier. While fish are cold-blooded and generally like warmer water in the spring, a sudden, harsh layer of surface heat on a flat, calm day can actually make them physically uncomfortable. It is exactly like walking from an air-conditioned room straight into a hot sauna. It shocks their system. Instead of cruising through that weird, hot surface layer, they will often slide down just below it, finding a specific depth where the temperature feels stable and comfortable. This is why your shallow-running crankbaits or your topwater frogs suddenly feel like they have fish repellent sprayed all over them. You are fishing in a temperature zone that the fish are actively avoiding. You have to get your bait down below that harsh thermal boundary layer. You need to find that sweet spot where the water temperature stabilizes, because that is exactly where the fish are hovering and waiting out the midday sun. Let us completely destroy the biggest myth in fishing right now, the legendary midday lull. How many times have you heard another angler pack up his gear at 10:30, complaining that the morning bite is over and the fish are just resting for the afternoon? People have foolishly believed this for generations. They think fish have a strict schedule, like they punch a clock at dawn, eat breakfast, and then go take a nice long nap until dinner time. This is pure laziness talking. Fish do not have watches, and they do not care what time it is. They care about energy conservation and easy opportunity. During that early morning feeding frenzy, they burned a massive amount of calories chasing fast-moving bait. Now that the sun is high and the water is flat, chasing fast bait takes way too much energy and leaves them way too exposed to danger. They switch from aggressive hunting mode to stealthy ambush mode. They are absolutely still willing to eat, but they are only going to eat if the meal is easy, natural looking, and placed right in front of their nose. If you keep burning heavy spinnerbaits past them at top speed, they are just going to watch it go by and laugh. You have to understand that the fish simply changed their mood. They went from sprinters to snipers. If you want to catch them, you have to stop fishing like a maniac and start fishing like a sniper too. It is a slow game of patience now. Think deeply about the shadows, or rather, the complete and total lack of them. In the early morning, every single rock, every log, and every wooden dock casts a long, dark shadow underwater. These dark shadows are the absolute ultimate ambush points. A big base will sit in that darkness, perfectly camouflaged, and blast any unsuspecting baitfish that swims into the light. It is a highly effective, low-energy way to hunt. But as that spring sun climbs straight up into the sky, around 10 or 11 in the morning, those long shadows shrink drastically. By noon, they are practically gone entirely. The prime ambush points simply disappear. A fish sitting next to a bare log is suddenly completely exposed to the bright, punishing sunlight. Without that comforting shadow to hide in, the predator feels extremely vulnerable. So what happens next? They abandon those shallow pieces of cover entirely and slide out to deeper water where the bright light cannot reach them. Or they bury themselves deep inside heavy, matted vegetation, right in the absolute thickest part of the weeds, just to find a tiny patch of shade. If you are still casting to the outside edges of the docks or the bare tops of the logs like you were 3 hours ago, you are casting to completely empty real estate. The shadows moved, the cover changed, and the fish relocated. You have to pitch your baits directly into the thickest, nastiest cover you can find. Now we really have to talk about your fishing line, because on a calm spring morning, your own line becomes your absolute worst enemy. When the wind is blowing nicely and there is a decent chop on the surface, the water is broken up. The sunlight is scattered everywhere. Fish cannot see very well, and they definitely cannot see a clear piece of fluorocarbon or monofilament slicing rapidly through the water. But when the wind dies completely and the lake turns to solid glass, the underwater visibility skyrockets. That bright morning sun acts exactly like a police spotlight, illuminating every single floating speck of dust in the entire water column, and it absolutely illuminates your fishing line. Heavy braided line stands out like a thick black cable. Even thick, clear fluorocarbon can catch the bright sunlight and flash like a mirror. Fish are not stupid. If they clearly see a thick, unnatural string attached directly to the front of your bait, they are going to hit the brakes instantly. They will slowly follow your lure, stare at it closely, and turn away in disgust at the last possible second. You have probably seen this exact thing happen and wondered why they did not bite. It is because they saw the trap. After 10 in the morning on a slick, calm day, you absolutely must downsize your line. You have to switch to the lightest, thinnest, most invisible leader material you can possibly get away with. Let us dive into your lure selection, because the exact bait that made you a total hero at 6 in the morning is making you look like a complete fool at 10:30. In the dim, dark morning light, loud, aggressive, bright-colored lures are incredibly effective. Neon chartreuse, bright orange, massively rattling crankbaits and buzzing topwaters. They grab a ton of attention when visibility is terribly low, but once that sun gets high and the water goes dead calm, those exact same lures become completely overwhelming to the fish. Imagine trying to relax in your quiet living room and someone violently shines a spotlight in your face while blowing a massive air horn. That is exactly what a loud, neon crankbait feels like to a fish in calm, bright water. It absolutely does not look like food anymore. It looks like a dangerous threat. It looks incredibly unnatural. The fish will literally scatter just to get away from it. You have to completely tone it down. You need to violently transition from shock and awe to ultimate stealth and realism. This is the exact critical moment when you should be reaching for pale, translucent colors. Ghost minnow, clear watermelon, pale smoke. Colors that light can easily pass through. Ditch the heavy rattles. Ditch the blinding neon paint. You have to gently seduce the fish right now, not aggressively shock them into biting. You also desperately need to think about the physical noise you are making above the water. When the lake is completely dead calm, the acoustic dynamics completely change. A nice light wind easily covers up a lot of human error. The natural sound of waves slapping the fiberglass hull of your boat, the wind aggressively rustling the shoreline trees, it all perfectly masks your clumsy human movements. But when the wind dies completely and the surface goes flat, the entire lake becomes a giant, highly sensitive acoustic amplifier. Every single time you drop a heavy pair of pliers on the metal deck, every time you slam a plastic storage locker shut, every heavy, clumsy footstep you take, it sends a massive, echoing shockwave straight down deep into the water. In the spring, fish are already on extremely high alert because they are in a sensitive transition period. When they hear a giant, unnatural boom echoing through a totally silent lake, they shut down immediately. They aggressively press themselves against the bottom and lock their jaws tight shut. If you are fishing from the bank and loudly stomping along the shoreline, violently breaking dry branches and kicking loose rocks, you are pushing every fish within 50 yards out into much deeper water. You have to become a complete ghost. Silence is your greatest weapon when the water goes flat. Let us talk briefly about oxygen because it plays a very sneaky, silent role in exactly why the shallow bite painfully dies on completely calm days. In the early spring, the water is generally quite cool and naturally holds a lot of dissolved oxygen. But in extremely shallow, stagnant back bays where the wind has completely stopped blowing, things can get nasty and stale very quickly. Wind and crashing waves are exactly what mix fresh oxygen deep into the water. When the flat surface sits like a pane of heavy glass for several hours under the incredibly warm sun, the shallowest water can actually start to rapidly lose its dissolved oxygen content. The rotting, decaying vegetation from the previous fall starts to warm up and heavily consume that precious oxygen. For a fish, swimming into one of these stale pockets is exactly like walking into a stuffy, completely unventilated closet. It makes them incredibly sluggish and lethargic. They absolutely do not want to hunt in that stuffy environment. They will naturally slide right out toward deeper areas where there is a tiny bit more current, or out to the main lake points where the deep oxygen levels are much more stable. If you are stubbornly beating the very back of a dead calm, shallow cove at 11 in the morning, you might literally be casting into dead water. The fish simply left. Here is a completely different wild angle you might not have ever considered. The massive spring insect hatch. Spring is absolutely notorious for giant, overwhelming bug hatches, especially on those warm, incredibly calm, sunny mornings. Tiny midges, mayflies, and countless other aquatic insects patiently wait for the wind to die down so they can safely emerge from the water and fly away. Right around 10 or 11 in the morning, when the surface is exactly like glass, these hatches hit their absolute peak. Suddenly, the entire surface of the whole lake is covered in millions of tiny, hopelessly struggling bugs. The bluegill, the crappie, and even the smaller bass become absolutely mesmerized by this massive, easy feast. They tilt their heads straight up and spend all their precious energy softly sipping bugs right off the delicate surface film. When the entire local food chain is highly focused on tiny insects the size of a single grain of rice, your giant 5-inch plastic swimming worm looks completely ridiculous to them. The fish are totally dialed in on a micro hatch, and they will completely ignore anything that does not perfectly match what they are currently eating. If you notice a massive bug hatch happening on a calm spring day, you have to drastically alter your whole approach. You cannot force them to eat a massive steak when they are focused on eating popcorn. This brings us absolutely perfectly to the critical concept of completely downsizing your lure profile. I see guys out there stubbornly throwing the exact same heavy tungsten jigs and giant bulky swim baits they were throwing at sunrise. They foolishly think bigger bait automatically equals bigger fish, but in a dead calm, high sun situation, giant bulky baits just look incredibly fake and totally unnatural. The fish have way too much time to inspect the lure in the clear water. They can clearly see every single manufacturing flaw, every sharp hook point, and every slightly unnatural wobble. This is precisely when you have to swallow your pride and pick up the ultralight finesse gear. Downsizing is absolutely not a sign of weakness. It is a clear sign of a highly smart angler adapting perfectly to the harsh conditions. Tiny drop shot rigs, subtle Ned rigs, and ultra-thin wacky worms become your absolute best friends. A tiny 2-inch plastic bait barely makes a single splash when it hits the flat water. It sinks incredibly slowly and looks completely helpless. It does not intimidate the cautious fish at all. In fact, a small finesse bait looks like an absolutely guaranteed, totally easy snack that requires zero energy to catch. When the bite gets unbelievably tough and the water is perfectly flat, the absolutely smallest lure in your tackle box is usually the only one that will save your entire day. Speed completely kills. And in this highly specific case, fishing way too fast will completely kill your entire chance of catching anything. Early morning fish are incredibly aggressive. They will gladly chase a fast-moving spinnerbait for 10 yards just to violently smash it. But when the water calms way down and the bright sun gets extremely high, their strike zone shrinks drastically. They are absolutely not going to swim 5 feet out of their way to chase down your rapidly fleeing lure. If you are retrieving your bait at the exact same aggressive speed you used at sunrise, you are ripping it right through their tiny strike zone way before they even have a split second to react. You have to slow down, painfully, agonizingly slow. You want to make a long cast and just let the bait fall all the way down to the bottom. Let it sit completely motionless there for 10 seconds. Twitch it exactly once. Let it sit totally still again. You want to carefully agitate the fish into biting out of pure annoyance or sheer laziness. A subtle bait that is creeping slowly across the bottom looks exactly like a dying, totally helpless meal. It appeals directly to their natural instinct to conserve vital energy. It is mentally exhausting to fish this slowly, but this is the brutal reality of calm water fishing. So where did all the fish actually run off to? If they totally abandoned the shallow feeding flats, you need to know exactly where to find them. The absolute best place to look is the very first primary drop-off. Think of the lake bottom exactly like a giant staircase. The shallow flat is just the top step. When the hot sun gets way too bright and the calm water gets way too clear, the fish simply gracefully slide down to the very next step. They do not swim 3 miles across the main lake. They just gently move out to the edge where the water depth drops from 5 feet straight down to 15 or 20 feet. This specific drop-off provides them with absolutely everything they need. It gives them a much darker environment to easily hide from the punishing sun. It gives them cooler, much more stable water temperatures. And it gives them an absolutely perfect vantage point to simply look up toward the shallows and patiently watch for wandering baitfish. If you really want to crack the secret code after 10 in the morning, position your heavy boat way out in the deeper water and cast directly up toward the shallow lip of that specific drop-off. Slowly drag your bait perfectly over the edge and let it tumble down the steep slope. The fish are sitting right there on that ledge, just waiting for food to slip over. Let us deeply discuss the subtle, lost art of relentless bottom contact. In the dark morning, fish are happily looking up. They are very willing to violently attack baits near the surface or nicely suspended right in the middle of the water column. But as the dreadful midday slump heavily sets in, they completely hunker down. They belly right up to the literal dirt. They strongly position themselves incredibly tight against the heavy rocks, the soft mud, or the very base of the thick weed stalks. And this precisely means that if your bait is swimming even 1 foot above the bottom, they might not even bother lifting their eyes to look at it. You have to absolutely force the interaction by maintaining constant, completely relentless bottom contact. You eagerly want a heavy enough weight on your finesse rig so that you can easily feel every single tiny pebble. Slowly dragging a bait aggressively kicks up tiny little puffs of fine silt and soft sand. Those little delicate puffs of mud are incredibly natural looking. Crawdads do it all the time. Goby do it. Bottom-feeding minnows do it constantly. When a highly lethargic fish clearly sees that little cloud of dust, it massively triggers a completely different feeding instinct. It powerfully looks like something trying to desperately hide, and predators absolutely hate when their prey tries to hide. We urgently need to carefully address the incredibly frustrating suspension phenomenon because it is one of the absolute hardest things you will ever encounter. Sometimes the fish completely refuse to go to the bottom, and they certainly do not stay on the flats. They just pull way back into massive open water and completely suspend right in the middle of absolute nowhere. You stare at your fancy sonar screen and you clearly see thick arches hovering 20 feet down in 40 feet of completely empty water. They look totally asleep. This happens a tremendous amount on dead calm spring days when the surface is super warm, but the deep water is still freezing cold. The fish quickly find a completely comfortable temperature band right in the middle and just float there effortlessly. Catching heavily suspended fish in slick, calm water is unbelievably difficult. They have completely amazing visibility, absolutely zero cover to block their view, and totally zero motivation to move even 1 inch. If you encounter this mess, your absolute best option is vertical fishing. You have to precisely drop a bait perfectly straight down so it gently stops exactly 1 foot directly above their heads. You never ever want to drop it slightly below them. You just gently hover that bait right in their face until they finally snap. Now we absolutely have to talk about the fragile psychology of the typical angler. Fishing is honestly 90% totally mental. When that horrible 10 in the morning shutdown actually happens, the very first thing that completely breaks is not the lake, it is your own personal attitude. You start casting incredibly carelessly. You completely stop paying close attention to your thin line. You start lazily slouching in your seat and loudly complaining to your buddy about how absolutely terrible the weather is. You are physically still out there fishing, but mentally you are completely checked out and already driving your truck home. And guess what? The fish can absolutely tell. When you totally lose your intense focus, your retrieve gets incredibly sloppy. You totally miss the highly subtle little ticks on your line that indicate a tiny finesse bite. A high sun, perfectly calm water bite is absolutely never going to be a massive, rod-jerking, violent smash. It is going to feel exactly like a tiny, wet leaf snagged on your sharp hook. It is going to softly feel like a tiny rubber band very gently snapping. If your brain is checked out, you will completely miss every single one of those subtle bites. You have to mentally force yourself to hyper-focus when the conditions get extremely tough. The fish are there. There is a massive secret weapon that you absolutely must carefully watch out for during these miserable, completely dead calm periods. It is commonly called the magical thermal breeze. While the massive lake might look like a perfect glass mirror at exactly 10 in the morning, as the dry land around the lake heavily heats up, it rapidly causes the air to rise. This powerfully rising hot air eventually aggressively pulls cooler air right off the water, creating a very highly subtle, magical midday breeze. It usually happens right exactly around 11:30 or noon. It might only be a tiny little ripple, just a very slight disturbance on the surface, but to a big fish, it is exactly like the loud dinner bell ringing. That tiny, delicate ripple instantly breaks up the harsh, light penetration. It completely hides your visible fishing line. It gives the nervous bait fish a highly false sense of total security, causing them to finally loosen up their tight schools. The predators know this perfectly, and they will absolutely use that brief window of mildly choppy water to aggressively slide back up onto the shallow flats and violently hunt for about 30 short minutes. If you completely gave up and stupidly drove back to the busy dock at 11, you are going to completely miss this totally magical feeding window. The absolute final piece of the entire puzzle is fully accepting that Mother Nature absolutely does not care about your personal schedule. The dead calm spring morning shutdown is absolutely not a terrible curse. It is just a highly specific test. It is a strict test to clearly see if you are a completely stubborn one-trick pony who only knows how to blindly chuck and wind in completely perfect conditions, or if you are a highly adaptable, truly elite angler. The giant fish completely did not magically disappear. The beautiful lake is absolutely not a dead zone. The harsh environment simply rapidly changed and the strict rules of engagement completely flipped, completely upside down. If you totally stubbornly stick to the exact same loud pattern that magically worked at dawn, you are absolutely guaranteeing your own miserable failure. But if you take a deep breath, keenly observe the harsh sunlight, greatly downsize your tackle, perfectly hide your line, and tremendously slow down your presentation, you will easily unlock a completely new, hidden layer of the lake. You will totally start catching the huge fish that absolutely everybody else easily gave up on. Next time you're out there and the water beautifully turns to glass, please do not complain. Just smile, quickly adapt, and get to work. So let us wrap this all up. The massive secret to surviving the brutal calm water shutdown is realizing that the fish did not leave. Their environment just became incredibly hostile to them. The intense UV light penetration, the drastically sinking plankton, the total disappearance of hiding shadows, and the massive increase in underwater visibility completely forced the fish to entirely change their behavior. The most unexpected turning point for most anglers is finally realizing that the exact same bright, loud lure that made them a hero at dawn is literally acting as high-powered fish repellent by noon. When you completely stop blaming the wind and start intelligently adapting by drastically downsizing your baits, painfully slowing down your retrieve, totally hiding your line, and heavily targeting those critical first deep drop-offs, your entire fishing game will change forever. You will start pulling monster fish out of a lake that everyone else swears is completely dead. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If this video completely changed the way you look at calm water fishing, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like button, and join the community. Now I want to hear from you. What is your absolute favorite? Go to finesse bait when the water turns to glass and the bite gets incredibly tough. Drop your best answers in the comments below and let us get a great discussion going.